I'm Martin from Pointfire. This year I was hoping to entice you with a booth, games, prizes, giveaways. Okay, no, I have to settle for 60 seconds here to show you our very cool new translation tool for the brand new SharePoint multilingual publishing feature. The new feature is available for certain modern pages on communication site. Out of the box, if you click on translation, it opens up a translation panel. From there, you can create a copy of the page. It doesn't actually translate it. Let's create one for French, and then let's go view that page. The page is still in English. Someone on your staff has to translate it and to publish it. Let's try that again, but this time I've activated Pointfire translation automation. So once again, let's create one for French, and then let's view that page. By the time we view it, Pointfire has already translated for your approval. Go to try.pointfire.com for a free trial or contact us for a demo.
All right, Nandeep and Smita, take it away. I'm sure you're going to have a great session.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay, let me share my screen. Just confirm if you can see that. Okay,
Right.
And we can then get started.
Yep.
All right. I hope you can see. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So hello all. Good morning. Good evening. And welcome back again to Microsoft 365 Chicago. I hope you are having the great conference and you too will like this session. So this session is about extending your SharePoint solutions to Microsoft Teams. So we have been using SharePoint for more than 2 decades now. And then we have developed so many solutions on top of SharePoint. And then again, Microsoft Teams is kind of an new, but at least it is taking the pace in the market. So the solution which we have developed on top of SharePoint so far, in this particular session, we will see how we can port them to Microsoft Teams very easily without rewriting any of the code, but just few kind of tweaks to the solution, and then we will make it work for Microsoft Teams also. All right, so before we start the session, please do join Microsoft 365 Chicago in supporting Chicago Public Schools through the Children First Fund. Your donations make a difference. Okay. And then massive thanks to our sponsors. Thank you very much for your generosity to sponsor this kind of an event. Thank you very much for that. So the agenda for this session is we will see how the Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, they work better together. And then we will see like how the Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, they are tightly integrated with each other. And then we will start with embedding the SharePoint modern sites and pages into the Microsoft Teams using App Studio. And then we will move towards some kind of a development part, like the web parts or the apps that we have been developed on top of SharePoint using SharePoint Framework or SPFx, how we can easily take them to Microsoft Teams as an apps. And then we will open up for Q&As. Before we start the session, a quick introduction. Myself, Nandadeep Nathan. I'm Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services, Microsoft Certified Trainer, author of a couple of books on SharePoint Framework as well as SharePoint Hybrid with SharePoint 2019. I'm from Pune, India, and onto the right-hand side, here are a few social handles to get in touch with me. And with me today is Smita.
Hello all, I'm Smita Nasad. I'm from Pune, India, and greetings from Pune. So I'm mainly working in a Microsoft 365. I'm a Microsoft MVP and Microsoft MCT. I'm author of one book, and these are some of my social handles by which you can get in touch with me. So today we will see how Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, they better work with each other, how the collaboration between them, and then we will deep dive into the more aspects of SharePoint, and then how we can bring all of the apps that we have been developing with SharePoint so far to Microsoft Teams. So firstly, we will start with embedding the SharePoint modern sites and pages into the Microsoft Teams with the help of App Studio, and then we will see how we can bring all the modern customizations which we are developing on top of the SharePoint using SPFx web parts or any other components to Microsoft Teams app. So let's come to the first point, Microsoft Teams and SharePoint story. I know this is really very basic and everyone knows about this. However, still I wanted to keep this slide ahead of our discussion. So just to start with, or just as a starting point, so what happens is whenever we create any of the team inside Microsoft Teams, it gradually creates a SharePoint site in the background. So for example, when we create a demo team, that it will do is it will spin up one SharePoint site called as /sites/demo team, and then under that we will have a shared documents wherein we can share all of the documents related to that team. And then again for the general channel, there will be a folder called as general, and as and when we keep creating the public channels, there will be a folder created under shared documents. At the same time, when we will have any of the private channel created, in that case, we will have a separate private site created with the private permissions called as team hyphen private channel and name of the channel. And then again, we will follow the same structure. So in a nutshell, we will have one SharePoint site in the background for each of the Microsoft team that we develop. So with this background, let's start with our session. So again, this is a just thing to note that we just celebrated 20th birthday of SharePoint on March 20th, 2021. So that means we have been developing solutions on top of SharePoint for at least 20 years. So SharePoint has been serving us as an enterprise kind of a solution or a platform over the last 20 years. So obviously that means we have developed so many components inside a SharePoint, and all those components could be or may be a server side, but now that since we are moving gradually towards online, we are gradually even upgrading all those components to the online world. And again, as we keep on developing all these solutions, those are maybe just not limited to SharePoint, because at least all those boundaries are now fading away between a SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. So the entire objective of this session is like we will see how we can bring all those SharePoint apps which we have been developing over the last 20 years to Microsoft Teams. So we will monitor this journey of transition from SharePoint apps to Microsoft Teams app, like how we can still develop on top of SharePoint, but how we can add the flavor of Microsoft Teams tab to our SharePoint app. So let's firstly start with how we can embed the SharePoint site, which is serving as a background to Microsoft Teams inside a Microsoft Teams. So you can use a Microsoft Teams personal app model to pin any modern SharePoint page to the left navigation of Microsoft Teams. And this provides a great opportunity to expose the internet landing pages to serve corporate communication needs directly accessible by Microsoft Teams. So some of the scenarios we can consider over here, like adding your corporate intranet landing page to a Teams for easy discovery of news and content. Also, you can add a learning pathway solution to Teams to embedded the Microsoft 365 learning paths for your users. And you can add a single page communications on important topics for your company. So some of the things you have to consider is the target must be a modern SharePoint site or a page. Embedding classic publishing portals or other classic sites or pages is not supported and will not work. A user can add a personal app from the apps link in Teams. A user can pin an app to the app bar, that is the leftmost navigation in a Teams, by right clicking it and choosing a pin option. And then the administrators can deploy and pin an app to all our targeted users from the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. So all users accessing the embedded SharePoint page will need to have at least a read permission to access the page. If a tenant SharePoint site or page name or a URL is changed, the Teams personal app manifest will need to be updated. And if any changes are made to the pinning model for modern SP pages or site, it could require you to delete the existing pin personal apps and redeploy them. So now let's see in a practical how we can embed the SharePoint modern sites and pages in Microsoft Teams with the App Studio. So you will need to use the App Studio or any another editor to create the Teams manifest file with the necessary URLs to your SharePoint pages. So for that purpose, first you have to open a Microsoft Teams. Then you have to navigate to the Team Store by clicking Apps on the Teams app bar from the left navigation. Once you do that, you have to search and you have to find for the App Studio. So for example, once you clicked on it, if it's already installed in your machine, so it will give you option for open, and if it's not, then it will give you option for install. In my case, it is already installed, so it is giving me an option to open that App Studio. So once we open it, we have to navigate to the Manifest Editor tab. Once you are here, you have to click on the create a new app. Once you click, it will open a form and you have to provide app information on that form. So over there, the first thing is the short name, so the company intranet details, and then the full name. Again, you can provide a internet details. Once it is done, then you have to click on the generate to create a unique random app ID. After that, there is a package details. So you have to use a value that is unique to your environment. Then you have to give the version, and the best practice is generally we follow this version with 1.0.0. Then you have to provide a description for your intranet application. The next thing is the full description for your application, intranet application. Then the next thing is the developer information where you have to provide your name. After that, there is a developer information website. So your website, company website, or whatever the preference you have to provide that. After that, you have this partner information. You can leave that partner information empty because that's not a mandatory field. Then you have to provide an app URL. So this could be a pages in your portal. Then the next thing is the terms of use. Also over here, you have to provide a page in your portal. The last thing is of branding. So this would be visible on the app bar, that is the left navigation, and in the app installation user interface. So to see the branding guidance for the image and outline settings in the Microsoft Teams, you can see this Microsoft Teams official documentation by clicking the learn more. And then you can see the below also there are some of the sizes are already mentioned. So as per that, you can just upload it. Once you have done, you have to navigate to the tabs under capabilities. Then you have to click add under add a personal tab. Once you do this, you have to fill in the personal tab details based on your own setup. So here we have already done. So name, you can just provide an internet name, then entity ID, you can use any random ID. So the main thing you have to notice over here, that the content URL, how to form this content URL. So for that purpose, first thing is you have to provide a HTTPS, then you have to provide your domain URL. After that, /_layout/15/teamslogon.xpx, and the parameters as question mark SPFx is equal to 2 and destination is equal to page URL. So this way you have to form this content URL. Okay. And after that, you have this website URL, and you can leave this optional value empty also. Once you have done, you have to navigate to the domains and permissions under the finish. Then you have to make sure that the domains from your tab have a domain on it. Then you have to update the AD app ID as mentioned. Then you have to include your domain URL to the single sign-on value. So here is the one example. Once it is done, you have to navigate to the test and distribute under the finish. and install the solution to your usage by clicking the install button. So this will enable you to test the configuration and validate the solution setup. So once you click add to install the application to your personal usage from the App Studio, so after that you have to verify that the application is working based on your objectives in both in web and in desktop. So one thing you have to notice that you can modify the settings by going back to App Studio and editing the manifest using the manifest editor. You can deploy the app to all users or the targeted users by downloading the manifest from the App Studio and publishing it to the app catalog in Teams administration. And one thing again you have to notice that to deploy the solution to the users in your tenant, you must have a sufficient permission to deploy apps in Microsoft Teams app catalog. Now let's see what are the gaps. So there is no native navigation header or footer on embedded pages. So the search initiated from Teams will return a search result from a Teams and not a search result from the embedded site. You cannot create a content like a news, pages, list or libraries in a Teams. So you must create a content from a SharePoint site using a web browser or SharePoint mobile app. Also, the page comment feature is not available from the SharePoint pages when they are exposed in Microsoft Teams.
All right, so now that let's move to the next part, like how we can use the custom code that we have been developing so far on top of SharePoint to Microsoft Teams. So you must have heard about this SharePoint framework or SPFx, with which we can build the apps for SharePoint. So at least in the last few years, SharePoint framework has been very popular and it has become the first choice of modern SharePoint developers. The SharePoint framework plays very important role in customizing modern SharePoint. At the same time, it also supports classic SharePoint. The SPFx solutions, which are developed using open source toolchains, modern US standards, even the JavaScript libraries or frameworks like AngularJS, React.js, Knockout.js, even we can use Handlebar.js if needed. So this SPFx by MSDN definition is a page and web part model which provides full support for client-side SharePoint development. It also offers easy integration with SharePoint data, and also we can extend it to Microsoft Teams, which is the major topic of discussion for this session. So with the SharePoint framework, we can use modern web technologies and tools in our preferred development environment. So it could be Windows, it could be Linux, or even Mac OS. And then we can build the productive experiences and apps which are responsive and mobile ready. So we can also use modern JavaScript web frameworks, tools, and libraries to build SPFX based solution. So SPFX is generally available in SharePoint Online. It also supports on-premises version from SharePoint 2016 onwards. So in SharePoint 2016 and 2019, we can also use that. But at least this one is available in SharePoint Online as a GA. So what happens mostly is that whenever we create a site inside SharePoint, we can have various sites in SharePoint for various purposes. And then we have our data stored in that sites in the form of document libraries or list items. So we can have various number of document libraries or lists which can contain various information in the form of those documents and the contents. Then we have this SharePoint framework, or we can just call it as a SPFX, which will help us to create the components or apps or this SPFX web part by which we will be able to present that information from SharePoint in some kind of a meaningful way. Not just that, but also we will be able to create the web parts by which they can be configured. So in this particular animation, onto the right hand side, you will see the web part property pane, from where we can configure the properties for this web part. And then based on the properties selected by the user, this web part will change its its appearance, and then we will be able to showcase more information. So this way we will be able to surface all of the information that we have inside SharePoint using SPFX based web part. One thing is SPFX is not just limited to SharePoint. It's not that we can only use SPFX within SharePoint, but this SPFX is used for the enterprise level of solutions creation. So one of that, and even which is the topic of discussion for today, is Microsoft Teams. So with Microsoft Teams, with SPFX for Microsoft Teams, we can build Microsoft Teams tab. Even we can build Microsoft Teams personal app. We can build the SPFX web part, which can be surfaced as Microsoft Teams messaging extension. And even with the recent version of SPFX, which is SPFX version 1.12.1, we can also create the Microsoft Teams meeting apps. So we will mostly focus on to this area, but again, apart from that, we can have the Microsoft Graph interactions inside our SPFX web part. So we can make various Graph API calls, and we can interact across various apps and services inside Microsoft 365. So we can pull the data from those services, as well as we can push the data back to those services. Again, from SPFX web parts, we can call the Power Automate flows to automate any kind of a business solutions. And lastly, this SPFX can be used even inside Outlook. So as of now, Outlook web version is only supported for SPFX, but sooner there will be a support for the desktop version too. So the bottom line is that SPFX is not just limited to SharePoint, but even we can build the enterprise ready solutions with SPFX. So now let's focus on to how we can utilize all of those solutions into Microsoft Teams. So with that, we can extend all of our SPFX solutions that we have into the Microsoft Teams. So let's explore like how this Microsoft Teams extensibility and what are the benefits of using that with SharePoint Framework. So the benefits are like the development model is very much similar to SharePoint Framework web parts. If you compare that with the Microsoft Teams tab, any web part can be exposed as a tab or a personal app inside Microsoft Teams. And then SPFX offers different scoping options to expose the SPFX web part as a custom tab or personal app. So we do have here something called a supported host. So we will have a more look into it when we will go to the code. We will have the demo of it. But just to make a note here that, for example, if the supported host is set to Teams tab, in that case, we will be able to surface our Microsoft SPFX web part as a tab inside Microsoft Team. If the supported host is set to Teams personal app, in that case, we'll be able to surface that SPFX web part as a personal app inside Microsoft Teams. So SPFX offers these different scoping options, and then your tab will be executed in the context of underlying SharePoint site behind that specific team. So this means that you can take advantage of any SharePoint specific APIs or functionalities in your web part. So let's first concentrate on to how we can build Teams tab with SPFX. So building these tabs with SPFX and personal apps are very much basic. So with the release of SharePoint Framework version 1.8, Microsoft introduced the possibility to build tabs in Microsoft Teams using SharePoint Framework solutions, which means any of your SharePoint Framework solutions now can be easily ported to Microsoft Teams without any need for external services. And then these values which we have here in the supported host will decide how the users will be able to interact or work with your web part. So we have this Teams tab, and then secondly, we do have this personal app. So as a part of SPFX version 1.10, you can also publish your SPFX solution as Microsoft Teams personal app. So a personal app in Microsoft Teams is an app that user can install, and then it can be accessed through the left rail of Microsoft Teams. So let's see like how we can easily build those Teams tab as well as the personal app with SPFx. So what happens usually is that if I go to my SharePoint site, so this is the basic or the uh, best form of the SPFX web part. So this one is very basic, that whenever we create the SPFX web part, this web part will be shown something like this. Even we will be able to modify the properties of this particular web part. So what happens mostly is whenever this particular web part is hosted in SharePoint, it is able to detect that it is running inside the context of SharePoint, and then it is able to pull out all the properties of that SharePoint site. So for example, for the simplicity, we are just showing the title of the SharePoint site, but we can go into more complex scenarios. We can even get the list, members, libraries, even any of the other details of that SharePoint site. And then that detail can be showcased here. Even we can perform any kind of an CRUD operations with this SharePoint. But the bottom line is that when this web part is hosted inside SharePoint, it is able to detect that context, and then it is able to render the information about SharePoint. So let's take this web part now to Microsoft Teams. So now that I'm into my team, and then from this plus button, we will be able to add a tab, and in that tab, we will install this same web part, which is our Teams tab. So when it is installed, it looks something like this. So once we have that same web part inside Microsoft Teams, it is now able to detect that it is running in the context of Microsoft Teams, and then it is able to pull out the entire information about that team where it is hosted. So again, it is not only limited to this, but as we discussed, like for each of the Microsoft Teams team, we do have SharePoint site in the background. So even this web part can be able to pull out the information from that underlying SharePoint site. So that means we just have one web part developed, and the same web part can be used in SharePoint as well as in Microsoft Teams. So this was a very basic example of how we can use the same web part that we have been developed onto the SharePoint, and then how we can extend it to Microsoft Teams. So now that let's go into more complex scenarios, like how we can even surface our SPFx web part as Microsoft Teams messaging extension. So SharePoint Framework version 1.11 supports to host SPFx web part as Microsoft Teams messaging extension. So this offers more power to the developers so that they can now extend SPFx web part to Microsoft Teams as a messaging extension. So messaging extensions in a nutshell is like whenever we open any of the uh, chat window, in that case at the down bottom here, we see this new conversation, and here we have various options by which we will be able to send out some kind of an cards or see some kind of an information. Let's say, for example, if I type or open up this GIF and select this GIF, so I will be able to see this, and then even I will be able to send it to Microsoft Teams team. So similar experience can be built with SPFx. So in this particular scenario, we will see how we can build this experience as a Planet Explorer. So in this particular demo, that what we are going to do is we will have the information about the planets in the form of a JSON file. And then we will have the SPFX web part, which will showcase all those planets in Microsoft Teams. Once we click on any of the planet, that information will be sent out to a bot, and then bot will reply back onto the Microsoft Teams by sending an adaptive card. So I just tried to showcase everything in this demo, but probably what we can do is quickly I can go back to my Microsoft Teams team, and here we will click new conversation, and down here we do have our Planet Explorer, which is our custom solution. So once I click this, this will open up a window wherein we are able to see all of these planets. So all this information is now surfaced as a SPFx web part. So this one is nothing but an SPFx web part. So let's say now if I click on any of the planet, this information that I have clicked Mercury planet is being now sent to a bot, and then bot can form adaptive card, something like this, which is showing more information about that planet which we have selected, and then it send out that interactive bot on, sorry, interactive adaptive card onto this Microsoft Teams team. So again, let's say for example, if I open it up one more time and select another planet, maybe Neptune, in that case, it can detect that I have clicked Neptune. The bot can detect that. It can form the adaptive card, and then that adaptive card is now being sent into the Microsoft Teams conversation. So now let's see like how we can build this kind of a solution. So the four things that we will need here is a bot. Then we will need the Microsoft Azure web app to host this kind of a bot. And then we will need the SPFX web part, which is we are seeing right now on the screen. And then we will need Microsoft Teams, where we are going to host and use this entire solution. So let's start with the bot. So for the bot, we will need three things. First thing is the bot channel registration, where we can host our bot, and then we will create our bot using your teams. So it is not just that we should use only your teams, but again, we can create our bots using Visual Studio. But just to keep it simple, we are using your teams, which is open community initiative by which we'll be able to create the solutions for Microsoft Teams on top of Node.js and using the JavaScript. So we will use this your teams to create the bot, and then we will have to host this bot somewhere. So we will use Microsoft Azure web app, or for the local debugging, we can use ngrok. Okay. So with that, let me again go back to my developer machine here. And I now go back to my portal.azure.com or the Azure portal. So from here, you can create a new resource called as bot channels registration. So from here, maybe you can search for bot channels registration, and it should be here. So once you run through that particular wizard, it will ask you few questions about creation of that bot channel registration. And once it is created, we will be taken up to that resource, which is the bot channel registration. So in that, in this case, we just have the resource group and other things. So the major configuration thing here is under the settings in the configuration. So here we do have the Microsoft app ID, which is nothing but the bot ID for us. And then once we click into the manage, we will be able to specify the certificates or client secret for a secure communication with this bot channel registration. Another thing that we need to do here is we need to specify the messaging endpoint. So this is the endpoint or a URL through which the communication with bot will happen. So for this particular demo, we have been running this solution onto the local environment using ngrok. So we have this ngrok running, which is running right now onto the host name called as CBB66B, which is being configured here. So this is our simple configuration that we have for the bot channel registration. Secondly, that we will need to channelize this bot channel registration so that it can be used with Microsoft Teams. So we have connected to channel, which is Microsoft Teams in our case. Again, it can be channelized to various other channels, for example, GroupMe, Line, Telegram, Slack. So even it can be used with that. But for our demo, we are concentrating on to the Microsoft team. Okay, so this is the basic configuration that we have for the bot. Then we will come to this bot which has been created using your teams. So this solution has been created with your teams, and then in this solution we have this is the structure of that particular solution which gets created with your teams. And then we do have all of the planets here stored in the form of JSON file. So we have an array of JSON wherein we are storing the information about all of the planets like the ID, name, summary, and more detailed information about that planet. And then secondly, we also have one adaptive card, which we are going to send to the Microsoft Teams conversation when that bot will form the information about that planet, and it will be sent out to Microsoft Teams chat or that conversation as this display card or this adaptive card. The main logic of bot lies in this particular code. So here we have this method called as handle Teams messaging extension submit action. So this will be called as an entry point to our bot. So with this action, we will be able to get the information about the planet which was selected by the user. And then what we can do is we can simply query this JSON file in our case, and then we can get those planet card details. And then we can form the adaptive cards by filling out all those details, and using this context.send activity, we will be able to send out that card to Microsoft Teams channel or Microsoft Teams conversation, so that we will be able to see that entirely filled out card. Okay. Next thing that we will need is SPFx solution, which is built using version 1.11, and then we can extend the Teams manifest inside that solution with a compose extension. And then from there, we can respond to the user interactions, which will have a communication with the bot. So this particular solution that we have is the SPFx solution. And I just want you to pay the attention to this manifest JSON, where in the supported host, we don't have any support for Teams, because we just have the supported host for SharePoint web part. We haven't specified it as Teams personal or personal app or Teams tab. But this particular web part is surfaced into the Microsoft Teams team using this compose extension, by which we will be able to see that as a messaging extension inside Microsoft Teams. So in this compose extensions, we are referring to the bot ID, which we just created with our bot channel registration. And then we have this command by which we'll be able to invoke that Planet Explorer, which will showcase the entire thing. The major thing here is again the URL, which is with SPFx equal to true, and then it has got the component ID as the ID of our SPFx web part. So by which this SPFx web part will be available as the messaging extension when it is clicked. And again, this particular SPFx web part is very simple, that it just has got the document card images for all of the planets. Because of that, we see those images of the planets at the top. And when each of or any of that planet gets clicked, we simply send out that information to our bot that which planet has been selected. And then that bot can reply back with the adaptive card which it has formed. So this was very basic implementation that we have. And then for the deployment part, this is again a two-way deployment. That firstly, we'll have to make a deployment to SharePoint by preparing that SPFx package with these two commands, gulp bundle and gulp package solution. And the output of these two commands will be the SPPKG file, which we'll have to deploy to the tenant level app catalog in the SharePoint. And then we do have Teams folder inside our SPFx web part. So that Teams folder will have to zip together, which contains this compose extension configuration, and then two images for our SPFx, Teams app. So we can zip them together and then upload it to Teams. And then from here, we will be able to see something like this. So we already have, but again, probably just after this code walkthrough, I can show it again. So once we click this, this is the SPFx web part, which will open in the form of a document card. Once we click on any of the planet, it will send that information to the bot, and then bot can form this card, the adaptive card, and then that adaptive card will be sent out to the Microsoft Teams conversation. All right. Okay. So the next part is like we will see like how we can build Microsoft Teams meeting app with SPFx. So again, here is that SPFx version 1.12 supports for Microsoft Teams meeting app development. So again, this offers more power to the developer so that they can now extend SPFx web part to Microsoft Teams for building the Microsoft team meeting app kind of an experiences. So before that, let's see like what is mean by those Teams meeting apps, and then how those are related to the meeting lifecycle.
So in a pre-meeting app experience, permission users are users who can add apps to a meeting during a different stages of the meeting life cycle. So these users can add apps to a meeting through the tab gallery in two ways. So one is using the details tab on the team scheduling form, and then second one is using the meeting chat tab in an existing meeting. So the tabs apps are accessible in meetings details and at chat pages using a plus button. Then the next thing is in meeting app experience. So meetings apps are hosted in the top upper bar of the chat window and as in meeting tab experience using the in meeting tab. So when users add a tab to a meeting to the tab gallery, apps that are during meeting experiences are shown, and permission users can add apps while in the meeting. Then for the post-meeting app experience, permission users can add apps from the tab gallery to a meeting using the details tab on the team scheduling form and the meeting chat tab in an existing meeting.
So in a nutshell, the Teams meeting app can deliver a user experience for each stage of the meeting lifecycle, including pre-meeting, in-meeting, and post-meeting app experience, depending again on the attendee status. So we can integrate tabs, bots, and messaging extensions in each stage of the meeting lifecycle. So Teams end user can access apps during meeting using the tab gallery. For example, a pre-stage, we can use a Kanban board, or even launch an in-meeting kind of an actionable dialogue, or even we can create a post-meeting kind of an poll. So this specific example or the sample which we are going to demonstrate now, which is called as a questionnaire meeting app, is kind of a pre-meeting app experience which is built with SPFx. So the questionnaire meeting app provides a pre-meeting app experience for Microsoft Teams meeting attendees to ask the question related to the meeting before the meeting starts. So if you have any questions to the meeting organizer or to the other attendees of the meeting, this app lays down a foundation to create a forum where you can post your questions before the meeting starts. And then these questions can be handled by the organizer during the meeting. So let's see like how this experience looks like. Okay, so let's have a look at the demo. So what happens now that right now I'm into the Microsoft Teams. So I will go to the calendar. I can just find any of the free slot. Maybe I can choose this one, and then I will schedule a meeting. So I will just call it as a demo meeting, and then I will invite a few attendees here. So maybe I will invite Smita, and I will just click on send. So once I send, this particular meeting is now scheduled. And once I open up or expand this meeting tab, uh, in the plus icon, we can add a tab. And here we will be able to add our SPFx web part, which is our pre-meeting app experience built for the meeting questionnaire. So we can click on add here so that it will just verify, and we will be able to click save, by which that particular web part will get added as a um, meeting questionnaire app. So once we click on a new question, from here we'll be able to ask a question. So maybe I'll just call it as a question one. Here it goes. And then I will just save it. So this is how the experience will be, that we will be able to post a question to the to the other attendees as well as to the organizer of the meeting, and they will be able to see that. So I just want to again show the another meeting that we had previously. So maybe if I can open up this team meeting. So this is the experience for all of the users. So once they open up the team meeting, they can navigate to this tab called as meeting questionnaire, which is in our case is a pre-meeting kind of an app. So from here, all of the users, they can ask their questions before that meeting starts. So all of those questions will start appearing like this. And then during the meeting, the organizer and the other attendees can discuss these questions, and then it will they will get benefited from it. So this is the basic experience that we have. So now let's see in the code like how this happens. So again, as we discussed that wherever there is a Microsoft Teams team, there is again a SharePoint site in the background. So we are utilizing that SharePoint site to store this information. So this is the SharePoint site that we have. And even from here, you can see that just a few seconds ago, this was the question which I raised, question 1. And this question 1 is now got added to the SharePoint list. So this is the SharePoint list wherein we store all that information about all of the questions which are asked by those attendees for a specific Microsoft Teams meeting. Again, like how to identify that meeting is that each of the meeting that gets created in Microsoft Teams, it has got a unique meeting ID. So that meeting ID is something like this, a big long string, but this is unique for each of the meeting that happens through the Microsoft Teams. So taking that unique meeting ID, we will be able to send this information or store this information in a SharePoint list as a title. That means the question which is asked by the user, the description, and then when and who has asked this question. And this entire information is surfaced into this app, which is kind of a pre-meeting app experience for this solution. So let's have a look at the code. Let's have some code walkthrough how it is done. Again, I just want to pay your attention to this manifest JSON of SPFx web part, that for the supported host, we don't have anything being specified here. So the supported host is just SharePoint web part. All of the magic happens through is through the definition that we have here. So for example, if I go to the Teams folder and then if I go to the manifest, so here we have all of those configurable tabs. So through these configurable tabs, we are surfacing our SPFx web part as a channel tab as well as the meeting chat tab or the meeting details tab, by which we are able to surface that entire information of the SPFx web part as a meeting tab, right? So from there we can see, and then we have this service here which help us to read and write the data to this SharePoint list that we have in the backend. So we are simply reading the data to be shown here, as well as whenever we click on new question, we are submitting the data back by adding this add question. So the experience that we see here for this particular app is built using a React component, which is again using the Office UI Fabric controls in the background. So here we do have this primary button for asking a new question, which is this add question. And then we do have this all of the questions which are appearing here being shown as the activity item. So we do have all those activity items here through which all those questions are being showcased. And then we have another React component by which we are able to showcase this add question. So from here, we will just show the title, description, and when the save button is clicked, all that information will go to this SharePoint list. So these were kind of the demos that we were trying to present. So with which we will be able to surface all of our SPFx or these SharePoint apps that we have to Microsoft Teams. So even from here, you can see that we haven't changed any of our code which we had been developing on top of SharePoint, but just that we tweaked few configurations, and then this particular app or this SPFx web part can be easily surfaced to Microsoft Teams as a tab or personal apps or even messaging extensions or even the meeting apps. All right, so with that, here are a few of the resources if you want to deep dive further into this. And here are references of couple of my blog posts where I try to explain in more details like how this kind of an SPFx web part can be built, and then they can be surfaced in Microsoft Teams as a messaging extension or as the Teams meeting app in Microsoft Teams. And all of the codes that we have shown you during this session, they are available in the GitHub. So this questionnaire Teams meeting app is available under the PNP repository, and this Planet Explorer is available in the Git under my public repository. So if it sounds interesting to you, please explore this code and have your suggestions. And with that, thank you very much for having us here. I hope you enjoyed this session, and please help us to improve our conference and help our speakers to improve. Please use this scan code to have your feedback given to us. All right, so again, thank you very much, and back to you, Mohammed. Thank you very much for having us here.
Thank you, Nandi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Smita. Great session as usual.
Thank you.